spun my wheels. I lived in a tiny rooming house. I had to be paid every time I made a sale so I could eat. I say I never missed a meal, but I did postpone a lot of meals indefinitely. I went down from about 180 to 165 pounds during one cycle of poor sales. It's a great way to lose weight. You know, they say that salespeople who can't close sales have skinny kids. Well, when you're single, you just get skinny yourself. And then one day I noticed that there was a guy in our company. His name was Pete. I still remember that. And Pete was making 10 times as much as anybody else, and he wasn't even working very hard. I was getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I was beating the parking lot at 7:30 when people came to work. I would knock on doors all day long and knock on doors till 9 or 10 o'clock at night in apartment buildings and homes in the neighborhoods. This guy would roll into work after 9 o'clock. A prospect would come in, have a nice little chat, make a couple of sales, make a sale, go out, make another couple of sales, go out for lunch with a prospect, quit work at 4:30, made 10 times as much as anybody in our company. And it wasn't even working. So one day I did something which changed my life. And I didn't realize it. In life, sometimes you take turns. In life, you turn down this street, and it changes your whole life. You're never the same again. You decide to go to a party, and you meet a person, you get married, settle down, have children for the rest of your life. And you weren't planning to go to that party at all. So life is a whole series of remarkable coincidences. So anyway, I did something that changed my life. As I went to him, I said, Pete, what are you doing differently from me? How come you're making so many sales? He said, well, if you really want to know, I'll help as much as I can. He said, show me your sales presentation, and I'll critique it for you. I said, my what? Your sales presentation. I said, you show me yours, and I'll show you mine. Because I had no idea. I was using the blah, blah cell. You know what the blah, blah cell is? If you've never been trained in sales, you just use blah, blah. You get a prospect, you get between them and the door, and you go blah, 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 blah. And you say everything smart you could possibly think of until they start to look at their watch. And I never mind if people looked at their watches when they started banging their watch. That's when you knew you were in trouble. Anyway, I said, well, how do you define a sales presentation? And he told me, and I can tell you, I can spend a lot of time on this, but I won't. But what he showed me is that there's a logical and orderly process in selling. And I'd never heard that before. And I wrote it down, and I began, instead of talking, I began to ask questions, separating prospects from suspects, building rapport, identifying needs accurately, presenting effectively, answering objections, closing the sale, getting referrals. 7-part process. I couldn't believe it. My sales just suddenly hockey stick. Now, an interesting thing happened. I was just thinking about it on the way over here, because there's some interesting research that's come out, and it says that most people work hard to learn their profession in the first year, and then they never grow again. And so a person who's starting off in their field, and they're comparing college grads in accounting or engineering or anything else, they find that these people, the person who's been in the business 8 or 10 years, compared to a person who just came out of college and has 1 year experience, their level of proficiency, level of intelligence, level of wisdom is no different. So in other words, you heard the old saying, people have, persons that have 20 years experience. No, sir, you've got 1 year experience 20 times over. This is the case for most of the population. And it is, you have no idea. It's almost like having a genetic defect that's going to cause you to drop dead early in life. It basically destroys all possibility for success in life. And because the people around you all are the same way, most people think, well, since everybody's the same way, then that must be the way everybody is. No, not the successful people. Anyway, so Pete had got out of college. He had been recruited by a Fortune 1000 company, and they had trained him in selling. And they had trained him for an entire year in how to sell professionally. When I worked with IBM as a speaker, IBM would train a salesperson for 18 months. They would take 2 to 4 years before they hired a salesperson. They would interview them, give them tests, interview them, give them tests, and finally, they would start interviewing them when they were in their 2nd or 3rd year of college. They would wait until they got out of school, and then they would work for a couple of years. And they would wait until they were completely determined, or had determined that this was a good person. Then they would hire them and train them for 18 months, 9 months in the classroom, 9 months in the field, before they would be allowed to be alone with a customer for the first time. Now, because of IBM's changes, their sales training process is down to 14 months. They've really cut back. Sometimes I say to my audiences, I say, I know you had the same kind of training when you started off, didn't you? And everybody looks away, and they look at the floor. Because most companies don't do any training at all. The companies that are not really going to be in business for much time. Anyway, so Pete got 1 year, got a year of training in his company, and then went out and he could sell anything, anywhere, sell in any market. He was like a fast gun, could draw apart both guns, like in a Western movie. I mean, he was so good. He could sell any product, any market, up, down, any industry. He could just walk in. As soon as he could understood the basics of the product, he could just go out and sell 10 times as much as anybody else because he knew how. And that opened my eyes. I couldn't believe it. So I started to follow his advice. And then I said, well, what else can I do? He said, well, have you read any books on selling? I said, are there books on selling? I had no idea that there were books on selling. And I went down to the bookstore. I still remember the first book I bought. And it was by a man named Heinz Goldman, who I met many years later in Europe. And it was a book. It was called Winning Customers. I think that was the name of it. And it was based on 40 years of experience and thousands of customer interviews and sales. And he just put it on. And I started to buy book after book after book. And then I got the first audio programs that came out on selling. And I went to the first seminars that came out on selling. And every single time I learned and practiced something new, my sales went up and up and up. Now, interesting discovery, jump back. They have looked at the evolution of nations. And there's been a recent study that's come out that's so well documented, it's shocking. But what it said is that America, for about 150 years, had a learning ethic. Right up to about 1970, is that people kept learning and learning and learning. And the average wealth in America grew and grew and grew as the average income, average education in America grew and grew and grew. About 1970, for a lot of reasons that we don't need to go into, one being the unionization of the education system, so that basically we have mediocre teachers who don't like to teach, who are turning out children from high school after 12 years illiterate. They cannot read, cannot write. 49% of American adults, American students graduating from high school cannot fill out an application to work at McDonald's. Oh. They can't read that well. And we spend more educating students than any other country in the world. We could send every single child in America to the finest private schools for vastly less than we pay in the public schools. That's why most of the politicians, from the top down, have all their kids in private schools. They will not let the average parent get vouchers. And so what has happened is that the education level leveled off at about 1970. Now the other countries like Finland, Switzerland, Belgium, Holland, the Scandinavian countries, even Singapore, by the way, has gone ahead of us, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Korea, Japan. Their education levels have continued to rise. As their education levels have continued to rise, their gross national income has gone up and ours have leveled off. Now, when it levels off, it doesn't mean that the entire population has stopped learning. It just means that the majority have stopped learning. And what happens is people follow the followers, not the leaders. So since nobody's learning, then must be normal, not to learn. So we've come up with something, I'll jump ahead, we've come up with what we call the EVE ratio. And the EVE